Before anyone in the Maple Street Grill understood what was happening, a trained military dog had already made the entire diner freeze, because the moment the disabled Navy veteran politely asked a pregnant woman if he could share her booth, his canine suddenly locked on as someone across the room, like it had just recognized a ghost from the past. And within seconds, the quiet breakfast crowd would realize that the stranger they had barely noticed walking through the door carried a story far bigger than the crutches under his arms and the faded service patch on his jacket. The morning rush had been loud and ordinary up until that point, the kind of small-town breakfast chaos that happened every day in Briarwood, Missouri, where the Maple Street Grill sat on the corner across from the gas station and the hardware store. Plates clattered in the kitchen, the smell of bacon and buttered toast drifted through the air, and a group of construction workers near the window were loudly debating last night's football game, while a waitress hurried between tables balancing coffee mugs on a metal tray. No one paid much attention when the bell above the front door chimed, at least not at first. But the sound of crutches tapping against the tiled floor slowly began to cut through the noise of the diner. Conversation softened. A few curious heads turned. The man who had just entered moved slowly but with quiet confidence, his shoulders broad beneath a worn navy jacket, and his expression calm despite the long metal crutches tucked beneath his arms. His name was Marcus Hale, a former Navy veteran who had spent years serving overseas before an explosion during his final deployment cost him his lower leg. His left pant leg was neatly folded and pinned just below the knee, but Marcus carried himself with the same steady posture of someone who had once walked the decks of a naval ship in the middle of the night with the ocean wind cutting through the air. Walking beside him was a large sable-colored German shepherd wearing a tactical harness that read Service K9, Atlas in bold letters. The dog moved with quiet discipline, matching Marcus's pace step for step, its eyes constantly scanning the room the way only highly trained military dogs do. Atlas wasn't just a companion. He was a veteran too, having served alongside Marcus during missions that most people sitting inside the diner that morning could hardly imagine. As Marcus paused just inside the doorway, he glanced around the crowded restaurant searching for a place to sit. Every booth looked full. The counter stools were occupied by regulars who had been there since sunrise. For a moment, it seemed like someone might wave him over or offer to make space. Instead, something awkward happened. A man sitting at a four-person table quickly spread his newspaper across the empty seat beside him as if someone were already sitting there. At another booth, two college-aged customers who had clearly been using only half the table suddenly shifted their plates and bags to fill the empty side. One older man even pulled his chair closer to the table when Marcus approached, avoiding eye contact like he was worried the veteran might ask for the seat. Marcus noticed. Veterans notice things like that. But he didn't complain or react with anger. Instead, he simply gave a polite nod, adjusted his grip on the crutches, and continued moving deeper into the diner while Atlas walked calmly beside him. Near the back corner, a booth had only one person sitting in it. A pregnant woman in her early 30s with a warm face and a light blue sweater, slowly eating a plate of scrambled eggs while occasionally resting a hand on her growing belly. Her name was Emily Carter, and she had come in that morning hoping for a quiet breakfast before heading to a doctor's appointment across town. When Marcus stopped beside the booth, he gave a respectful smile that carried the quiet humility many veterans develop after years of service. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently, careful not to sound demanding. "Would it be all right if I sat here? Looks like the place is pretty full." Emily glanced up, momentarily surprised by the sight of the tall veteran and the disciplined German shepherd at his side. But her reaction was immediate and kind. She slid her coffee cup closer to her plate and gestured toward the empty seat across from her. "Of course," she said warmly. "Please, go ahead." "Thank you," Marcus replied, clearly grateful for the simple courtesy. Carefully, he maneuvered his crutches to the side and lowered himself into the booth with practiced ease, while Atlas quietly settled on the floor beside him, resting near Marcus's leg the way he had been trained to do hundreds of times before. For a moment, the diner returned to its normal rhythm. The clatter of dishes resumed. The construction workers picked up their conversation again. A waitress at the counter began refilling mugs of coffee, while the cook called out another order from the kitchen window. Emily offered Marcus a polite smile. "You passing through town?" she asked casually. Marcus shook his head. "Just moved nearby, actually." Figured I'd try the local breakfast spot. But before the conversation could continue, Atlas suddenly went completely still. The dog's head lifted slowly. His ears snapped upright. Every muscle in his body tightened, like a statue carved from stone. Marcus noticed instantly. Years of working with the military K9 had taught him to read even the smallest signals. Atlas wasn't just alert. He was focused. The dog's eyes had locked onto someone across the diner with such intensity that Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Emily noticed it too. Is he okay?" she asked softly. Marcus followed the dog's line of sight across the room toward the counter, where a young waitress was pouring coffee into a mug for a customer. Her name tag read Lena, and from the outside, she looked like any other diner employee starting another busy shift. But Atlas didn't blink. He didn't growl or bark either. He simply stared at her with a look of intense recognition that made Marcus slowly sit up straighter in the booth. Because military dogs don't react like that for no reason. Something about the woman across the diner had triggered a memory buried deep in the dog's training and experience. And within the next few seconds, what Atlas would do next would stop every conversation in the Maple Street Grill and reveal that the quiet waitress pouring coffee was hiding a past that no one in that room could have possibly expected. Atlas had been trained to notice the smallest signs of danger, and Marcus Hale knew from experience that when the German Shepherd froze like that, ears forward, body tense, eyes locked onto someone across the room, it always meant something important. The noise inside the Maple Street Grill slowly faded as Atlas continued staring toward the counter. Emily Carter followed the dog's gaze and noticed the young waitress pouring coffee. "Is he okay?" she asked quietly. Marcus leaned forward slightly, studying his partner's posture. Atlas wasn't growling or barking. He was simply focused, as if recognizing something. "He usually does that when he knows someone," Marcus said softly. Across the diner, the waitress, whose name tag read Lena, finally noticed the dog staring at her. At first, she looked confused, but then her expression shifted. She set the coffee pot down slowly and began walking toward the booth. A few customers nearby turned to watch, sensing the strange tension filling the room. When Lena reached the table, Atlas stood up and took one calm step forward, still silent, but clearly attentive. Lena looked down at him, and a small smile appeared on her face. "Well, that's something," she murmured. Marcus gave an apologetic nod. "Sorry about that. He doesn't normally stare at people." Lena shook her head gently. "No," she said. "He's not staring." She crouched slightly, studying the dog's face. "He remembers." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Remembers what?" Lena looked back at him with a knowing expression. "This dog used to wander into our medical tent every morning looking for food." For a moment Marcus just stared at her. Then realization hit him. "Hold on, you were deployed?" Lena nodded. "Afghanistan," she replied calmly. "Field medic." The words instantly quieted the surrounding tables. Emily leaned forward, clearly shocked. "You served overseas?" she asked. Lena shrugged modestly. "A couple of tours." Marcus looked down at Atlas, who was now standing beside Lena with his tail slowly wagging. "That explains it," Marcus said. "Military dogs don't forget the people who help them." Lena reached down and scratched behind Atlas's ear. "Especially when those dogs refused to stay still while we were pulling shrapnel out of them," she added with a small laugh. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "You treated him?" "More than once," Lena said. "He was stubborn even back then." Around the diner, the customers who had been ignoring Marcus earlier were now watching the moment unfold with quiet curiosity. What they had thought was just another ordinary breakfast had suddenly revealed something much deeper. Two strangers connected by memories from a battlefield thousands of miles away. And Atlas, the only one who recognized it first, had just reminded them all. For several long seconds, the Maple Street Grill remained completely silent as the truth slowly settled over the room. The same people who had quietly avoided the disabled Navy veteran when he first walked through the door were now staring at the small corner booth, realizing that the simple moment unfolding in front of them carried a story far bigger than they had expected from an ordinary breakfast shift. Marcus Hale sat back slightly in the booth, still looking at Lena with a mixture of surprise and respect. When he had entered the diner that morning, he had expected nothing more than a quiet meal and perhaps a polite conversation with the kind stranger who had offered him a seat. The last thing he expected was that his service dog would suddenly recognize someone from the battlefield. Marcus glanced down at Atlas, who had now moved closer to Lena's side, as if confirming what his instincts had told him from the beginning. The large German shepherd looked calm now, his tail moving slowly against the floor as Lena gently reached down and scratched behind his ears. The moment seemed to unlock memories for both of them. Lena's expression softened, and for a brief moment she seemed far away, remembering dusty tents, long nights, and the distant sound of helicopters. "He used to wander into our medical tent like he owned the place," she said with a small smile. "Every morning, right around sunrise." Marcus chuckled quietly. "That sounds like him." Lena looked back at the doc. "He was injured pretty badly once," she continued. "Shrapnel from an explosion outside the base. I remember trying to keep him still while we pulled the metal out." Marcus nodded slowly. "That mission nearly went sideways," he said. "Atlas refused to leave the patrol team even after he was hit." Emily Carter, the pregnant woman who had shared her booth with Marcus, watched the exchange with amazement. Just a few minutes earlier, she had thought she was simply sharing a table with a polite veteran and his service dot. Now she was witnessing two people realizing they had once been connected by a moment of survival thousands of miles away. "So you two never actually met back then?" she asked softly. Marcus shook his head. "No. In the field, you don't always meet the people who help you. Sometimes they're just voices behind a curtain or hands working quickly to keep everyone alive." Lena nodded. "That's how most of it works." Atlas slowly lowered himself onto the floor beside her. Then, in a quiet gesture that made several people in the diner gasp softly, the German shepherd gently rested his head against Lena's leg. The movement was slow and deliberate, the kind of action only a highly trained military dog performs when recognizing someone they trust. Lena looked down in surprise, clearly touched. "Well, I guess he really does remember," she said. Marcus smiled. "Dogs like Atlas don't forget the people who help them out there." Around the diner, the customers who had ignored Marcus earlier were now watching with very different expressions. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, remembering how they had quietly avoided sharing a table when the veteran first entered. The construction worker who had pulled his chair closer earlier finally stood up and walked toward Marcus's booth. He looked slightly embarrassed but sincere. "Sir," he said, clearing his throat, "I just wanted to say, thank you for your service." Marcus nodded politely. "I appreciate that." The man glanced at the crutches leaning against the booth and then at Atlas. "Next time you come in here, you're welcome at my table anytime." A few other customers murmured their agreement. The mood inside the diner had shifted from awkward silence to quiet respect. Lena picked up the coffee pot again, but paused before returning to the counter. She looked at Marcus and Emily with a warm smile. "Breakfast is on the house today," she said. Marcus immediately shook his head. "You really don't have to do that." Lena shrugged lightly. "I know," she replied. "But some reunions deserve a good breakfast." Emily laughed softly at that. Marcus finally gave in with a small smile. "All right," he said. "But next time it's my turn." Lena nodded and headed back toward the counter, refilling mugs as the normal rhythm of the diner slowly returned. Conversation started again, plates clinked, and the smell of fresh pancakes drifted from the kitchen window. But something in the atmosphere had changed. The people inside Maple Street Grill were now looking at the quiet corner booth a little differently. What had started as an ordinary morning had turned into a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are hidden in the most ordinary places. Emily glanced down at Atlas, who had now returned to resting beside Marcus's leg. "Your dog knew before anyone else," she said. Marcus scratched the top of Atlas's head and smiled. "That's because dogs see things people miss," he replied. And as sunlight streamed through the diner windows and the morning carried on, the small town of Briarwood witnessed something simple but powerful. A reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms anymore, and sometimes the only one who recognizes them at first is a loyal dog who never forgets the people who once stood beside him.